are today at another section that's very, very interesting. It's kind of one of the pivotal points of discovering Jesus. But before we go there, I just asked you to do this fun exercise, kind of to get us prepped into thinking we're always following somebody. Your life's not just going on an auto cruise mode. So I just did another fun exercise. Nowadays, most of the following happens on social media, right? So I said, okay, who are the top 10 people who are followed the most on Twitter? So you can see here, I'm sorry, the print is not that great. These are like the top 10 personalities who have the maximum number of followers on Twitter. And out of the top 10, 8 of them are related to, pop or rock music artists. Obama just made it, as someone who is being followed the most. But it's kind of taken over by the entertainment industry, basically, right? And that's kind of also synonymous with Facebook and stuff, where you can actually follow people. And so if you go and see, this is really what people are following around. And none of those top people had any other influencing people. So I said, okay, let's go way down the list to see if there is at least any sort of religious figure there. And you can see here, thankfully, Dalai Lama shows up at the 100th person. He's the first religious figure to show up in the top 100 list of people who are being followed the most. And Google just before him. But I kind of like, why would people follow Google? It's kind of weird. I don't get that part of people following Google. But, this is really the list of people who attract a lot of followers, and millions of them. And these are people who are constantly influencing our contemporary society. All right, now, any of you know about what this is? This picture that you see here? It's very familiar if you owned a smartphone. When you try to text people, then they try to text you back. You see these 3 bubbles on the screen, right? There's a very fascinating article on New York Times. It says we are having a new psychological problem. A new kind of anxiety has come. It's called the text bubble anxiety. You know what a text bubble anxiety is? You text somebody, and then there's these 3 bubbles up there, and it just captures you. You're like waiting. Okay, what is this person going to tell me? If they say something, it means they acknowledge you're there. And it depends on the conversation, how important that conversation is. If you're like asking them a serious question, then you're like holding your breath. All right, is this person going to respond to me, or are they going to ignore me if they respond and then say something very simple? It's not exciting anymore. But if they just stop, then they know that you ignored. It's called a text bubble anxiety. And people are researching this stuff, and we're just so obsessed by, the perception of how we are liked. And either we are following somebody, or we want somebody to follow us. And we kind of have come to live in a way to measure our self-worth in the age of social media, especially with the younger people, by the number of likes that we get, or the number of followers we have. And maybe in Bay Area, it's maybe different. I think who do people follow most, consciously or subconsciously? I think everybody in the Bay Area loves young tech entrepreneurs. People like Mark Zuckerberg, Larry Page, or guys like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos, because they're kind of treated like the gods of our society, and people follow them. We follow them. We are like, what's their newest trend? Or maybe there are these sports teams that we so passionately follow about, right? So in this context, if Jesus shows up, and he does, as we read in today's passage, and he does 2 things. The first thing is, he tells us who he is, and the second thing is, he tells us why we should follow him. Who is Jesus? And why should we follow him, or how should we follow him? And that's what we are going to read. And if you look at the answers to Jesus, in contrast to all these people that we saw, they're so mind-boggling. It looks at first glance, there is nothing attractive about this Jesus that you have to follow him. And secondly, even if you follow him, it doesn't look like that life is exciting either. And that's the dilemma we are in as we are in this passage. So let's break them up one by one. Who is Jesus? You know, it begins by saying in verse 27, Jesus went on with his disciples to the villages of Caesarea Philippi, and on the way he asked his disciples, who do people say I am? You know, place matters. If you're trying to propose to somebody, you want to take that person to a special place and have the perfect ambience to say the right message. Of course, it doesn't apply if you are in an arranged marriage scenario because somebody else fixed that place for you. But in a sense, place matters to communicate a message, and there's a reason. When Jesus goes to this town called Caesarea Philippi, it's a special town because it was the residence of the current Herod Philip, and he actually built that town to commemorate Julius Caesar. So it was the king's town. If you're in that town, everybody's talking about Caesar or the king. And so it's just natural that when Jesus goes there, he asks his disciples, all right, we are in this town where everybody's talking about who's the actual king, and he wants to find out from them what the people are talking about him, because he's been doing miracles and he's been teaching stuff. And the way this unpacks is kind of beautiful. It's like a Hollywood movie. You know, you have this long, wide shot, and then they keep zooming into a second level and a third level. So Jesus is first asking him, at a very wide level, what does everybody say I am? And then he zooms down to say, what do you say I am? And then he even finally zooms even further, and he himself says who he really is. And at the popular level, we see that as we read that response, some things he's John the Baptist, something he's Elijah or the prophets, they all just miss it. You know, people have seen his miracles, they've heard his teaching, but for some reason it's not enough to get a clear picture. You know, is it possible to miss who really Jesus is, even if we know or if we think we know a lot about him? I think there is a bigger danger if you know a lot about him to really miss who he is. Especially if you were raised in an environment where Christianity was the norm, you went to church every Sunday and you kept hearing all the stories about who Jesus is, you can really actually miss who he is. It's so possible. And even if we know a lot from the Bible, it's still possible to miss who Jesus is. And I've had that experience in my own life. I grew up memorizing a lot of Bible. I grew up knowing a lot about Jesus, all the stories and everything. I still didn't know who he is. I'm still kind of discovering who he is. It's not that I've completely known who he is. But that's the danger. And so he then flips the question, and Jesus says, okay, I don't know what generally everybody thinks about myself. But you see, the point is Jesus is actually really concerned to know what you and me think who he is. Who is Jesus for us today? So he flips it now and makes it a little personal. He says, who do you say I am? And then Peter responds. Remember, this is in a sense the gospel of Peter because it's Mark who was staying with Peter who is writing, so he gives you that first-hand relationship and the dialogues that went between them. And Peter says, you're the Christ. And Jesus says in other Gospels, Peter was not just great because he got it. He said, you got it because God showed it to you. Others didn't get it because they haven't seen it. But the word Christ is very interesting. He says, you're right. The word Christ is, we know the word, it's popularly known as Messiah, but it was, the originals used to refer to someone who is anointed, or if someone is going to become a king, they were going to pour oil on him and say, this is going to be the king. And so here is Jesus. He's saying, yeah, you got it. That's right. I'm not just a king. I'm the ultimate king. Now that should excite you. If you're a disciple, if you're trying to follow someone, you want your heroes to be great, right? You wouldn't follow Kobe Bryant or LeBron James if they were scoring 10 points per game. So Peter's obviously happy. Yeah, I'm following this guy. I just dropped my left, went after him. Yeah, that's right. I think he's the king. And Jesus says, yes, I'm the king. So far, so good. It's great. But now comes the twist. Now comes the big twist. Jesus pulls the rug under the carpet from Peter. He goes to this third level, this intimate level of self-disclosure. And he says, okay, let me tell you who I really am. Okay? Peter, you ready for this? And then it says, he began to teach them. He uses two phrases. The Son of Man must suffer many things and be rejected by the elders and the chief priests and the scribes and be killed, and after 3 days rise again. And Peter goes like, what? I thought I'm coming after a king. And he completely loses it. He completely freaks out. Let's break this down. You know, there's an interesting part. He uses the word Son of Man. It's a very peculiar phrase. And the word, the Son of Man, Mark uses 14 times throughout his gospel. Very unique phrase. And it actually, the only parallel of that comes from a book that was written several centuries ago by Daniel. In Daniel chapter 7, there are 2 verses which actually depicts what the Son of Man is. In Daniel chapter 7, 13 and 14, it says, it's a vision he gets. I saw in the night visions, and behold, with the clouds of heaven there came one like a son of man, and he came to the Ancient of Days and was presented before him. And to him was given dominion and glory and a kingdom, that all peoples, nations, and languages should serve him. His dominion is an everlasting dominion which shall not pass away, and his kingdom one that shall not be destroyed. Wow, that's impressive. I get that. Peter may like that. Yeah, I like this kind of a king. But what's this other part? You're talking about stuff like you're going to suffer, you're going to be rejected, you're going to be killed. What about me? I just left everything to come after you, and here you are. I thought you'll be this great king ruling over Israel from Jerusalem, and I can actually get the minister's chair next to you. In fact, they actually end up fighting for that. Who's the greatest in the kingdom, right? But what are you talking about, Jesus? You're going to be suffering? Rejecting? And he completely couldn't get what that rising again part was. He was like, what is he talking about? You know? And Jesus says, this is his grandest self-disclosure. I am the king. But I did not come for the throne, I came for the cross. I'm not going to go to Jerusalem like the other kings to capture power with power, but I'm going to go to Jerusalem to suffer and die. This was something no one ever heard of. Even the Jews didn't hear about this. Yeah, they read about a servant savior who will suffer, but then they were always expecting this great King David who will come and who will have this perfect kingdom forever and ever. And here is the first time in history, in redemptive history, Jesus is combining both. The king who is going to come and the servant who is going to suffer are the same, and that's me. That's a grand revelation for Peter. And it's something that his human mind is just not able to get around. And it's not just that he says, I'm the Son of Man, I have to suffer. He uses the word, I must suffer, I must die. Why should Jesus suffer? Why should he be rejected? Why should he be killed? And why should he rise again? You know, there's this very funny advertisements you see on TV from insurance companies. Like this neighbor is chopping his, tree branch. We just ended up chopping some branches in our trees last week, so I got reminded of this. And as he chops this tree, it falls on the neighbor's car. And the neighbor is standing right next, and he's like, are you serious? And there are all these funny ads where, there's a car parked on the roadside between a huge truck and another car, and the truck is backing up and crushes this car. And then the ad is like the insurance company comes and says, oh, people, they make mistakes. We'll cover you for all these mistakes. It's funny, but you see, although the insurance companies say that, you're paying for the premium. Right? Who pays for that in some way or the other? There's always a cost involved. I mean, it's a very clever ad. It gets your attention. But it's always, when something is messed up, a cost is always involved. I have a confession. I have very bad hand-eye coordination, so I keep dropping stuff all the time. Like even now I spilled some coffee here, thanks to my wife. But when I was growing up, when I was really young, I remember I I had to fix a light in my home, and they gave me the job. I don't know why they would. And I broke the light, okay? And so my mom shows up, and I'm just afraid to own up, so I lied to her. I'm like, what are you talking about? I don't know. But, you can't lie and survive with your moms, right? Because they find out, they know what you are thinking. And she's like, and then I go confession time, yeah, I did break the light. And then she looks at me, and she's like, okay, I'm glad you owned up, and don't worry about it, and I'll fix it. And she fixed it. But, yeah, I messed up, but still for her to fix it, it didn't just come free. She had to buy another one. She had to pay the cost by working hard to make sure that there was enough money to do something like that. When someone does something wrong, and for us to show that we forgive them, there is always a cost involved. Someone has to suffer. And forgiveness involves suffering. And in human relationship, it's all about payback, right? I mean, I hurt you, you hurt me back. If someone tries to get you at work, you just outsmart them, you just outpower them, you just outmaneuver them. But in God's world, it's flipped. It's entirely the other way around. He says, that's our human definition of love, but in God's love, he says, yeah, you messed up, but there's only one way that I can fix this. I want to forgive you, but in order for me to forgive you, I have to suffer, because someone has to absorb that cost. Someone has to pay the judicial punishment for that, and you can't do it. So therefore, I have to come not just as your king, I have to come as your king, and I have to be the one who suffers instead of you. That's beautiful, isn't it? That's amazing. And this again is mind-boggling to Peter in verse 32 and 33. Peter took him aside and he began to rebuke him, it says. But then turning and seeing his disciples, Jesus rebukes Peter. The word rebuke he used is a strong word. That's the same word that Jesus uses whenever he rebukes demons and stuff like that. Peter finds this very appalling. But Jesus says, you don't get it. And he says, get behind me, Satan. What, is he using cuss words on Peter now? No, Jesus recognizes that's the way Satan tries to thwart God's plan. That's the way Satan tries to prevent God's salvation and his cross from happening, because then you and me constantly can be pitted against one another. We will never understand forgiveness. We can never practice true love. And that was what Jesus refers to him. And now he's done saying who he really is. I'm the king, but I'm the suffering king. I didn't come for the throne, I came for the cross. And I have to suffer because there's no other way I can show my love to you. And we don't get it in our human minds, in our human understanding, in our human relationships. It just doesn't work that way because we're always so used to hurting those who hurt ourselves. And Jesus says, although you hurt me, because you're my child, I'm going to do this for you. Just like how my mother was able to absorb the cost of my wrecking something, here is God, our Father, who loves us so much, and he says, I'm going to absorb the pain and the suffering that you have to go through so that I am now going to come. And this is my true identity. I am the king who came to suffer on the cross. That's who I am. A one-line definition of Jesus, the king who came to suffer on the cross for you. Now, how should we follow him? That's the second part. All right, this is who Jesus is. Very interesting. But you see, so far, if you kind of picture how this would have happened, right? It's this laid-back countryside, sleepy town. Jesus walks in, disciples all around, casually throws the conversation, who do you say I am? And it gets very intense very quickly with Peter saying all these things. Now, Jesus is really worked up that it sounds like he's yelling at Peter. He says, get behind me, Satan. And now he's pouring out, you know who's going to follow me? And he's barraging these words, and he calls the crowd to him with his disciples, and he said, if anyone would come after me, let him deny himself and take up his cross and follow me. For whoever would save his life will lose it, but whoever loses his life for my sake and the gospel's sake will save it. For what does it profit a man to gain the whole world and forfeit his soul? For what can a man give in return for his soul? For whoever is ashamed of me and my words in this generation, of him the Son of Man shall also be ashamed when he comes in glory. Wow, he lays down 3 boom, boom, boom principles. If you want to follow me, deny yourself, pick up your cross, follow me. There's a triple imperative there. Number 2, lose your life. Number 3, profess me unashamedly. How very exciting is that? Now, first of all, I thought you're a king who will have power and I can share in that power because I have some agendas. I need these stuff in my life. I thought if I follow you, king, you will fix all the things in my life. You will give me, the American dream. You will make me to succeed in everything I want to do. And that's why I thought I can follow you. But you're saying you're going to die and you're going to suffer. And now on top of that, for that, if this is who you really are, you want me to hate my life? You want me to deny myself? What's wrong with you? Why would anyone follow you? This is so unattractive. And no wonder Jesus is not number 1 on the top 100 followers in Twitter, even if he were alive and he was tweeting today, right? Why should I deny myself? I'm just trying to live my life. I'm just trying to, make some money and get a job, buy a home, settle down. What's wrong with that, Jesus? What's really wrong with that? And it's horrible because he just doesn't say in this triple imperative, deny yourself. He says, pick up the cross. You know who would pick up a cross those days? Was a criminal. If you were someone who did something so bad, like those two criminals who were hanging beside Jesus, then you'll pick up your cross. So you're saying, not only should I deny myself, I should become like a criminal suffering to that extent? This is so weird. And Jesus said, yeah, that's pretty much the definition of a disciple. How many of us would be excited? Honestly, if Jesus comes and says, this is the profile of my disciple, that deny yourself and suffer like a criminal. Are you interested? Really? You want to follow Jesus? Why should I lose my life? Why should I profess him unashamedly? It's not actually very politically right to do that. You don't get it. In my workplace, where people are, hot on topics like, LGBT, I can't go and talk about this Jesus. Are you serious? This is Bay Area 21st century. Wake up. But the clue is, it's actually hidden in those words that we read. He talks about denying ourselves. He talks about losing our life. And we need to get beneath those to see what are those things so we can understand what exactly he's talking about. What is self? What does denying the self mean, ourselves? My natural default self, a definition of myself describes that part of me that thinks that my life is in my control. Now that's the self-understanding. And I adore myself, I love myself, I care how I look, I stand in the mirror and watch myself, is my body in shape, and from that to what people are thinking about me, or my Facebook posts hitting 100 likes, that's what I'm always possessed about, And in short, a real definition of self is, I want to do what I like, when I like, and how I like. Where selfish comes from, but that's really the definition of self. And it's kind of affirmed by the world. It says, it encourages us, do it. Self-promotion, Try to by hook or crook, make yourself look better. Posture yourself in the workplace like you're the man, whether you're really the man or not. Because there is another deeper element within us that constantly tells us to keep thinking and promoting ourselves, which the Bible calls us sin. It wants us to make us love ourselves more so that we can not just be self-lovers, we can be our own gods. Aha. That's a problem. What happens with that? Jesus says, if you are so self-centered, you can't follow me. If you're so obsessed with yourselves all the time, you can't follow me. Why? Because that's exactly why I came into this world. I came into this world to lose myself on the cross, to lose my identity on the cross, to lose my identity as the Son of God who shared with him the glory even before the foundation of the world. I lost myself on the cross so that you can have an identity, a new one. And I'm going to talk about that briefly. So if you have to follow me, you have to choose the path of suffering too. You got to suffer like me. Because if you have to show that kind of love to somebody who hurts you, it's going to hurt. If you have to show that love to your spouse, even, not even a stranger, when your spouse does something that hurts you, to overlook and say it's okay and absorb the impact of that aspect of relationship that hurt you, it's a form of suffering. Are you ready for that? That's what I came to do, not just for you individually, but for the whole humanity. Now, if you are ready for that, be my disciple. And he can say that because he did it on the cross for us. And in that way, denying myself now is actually not a bad thing. It actually makes me a blessed person. It actually flips it the other way around. Let's move quickly to the second one. Lose your life. What do you mean lose your life, Jesus? Okay, this first part was all right. I get it. I shouldn't be a selfish person. Nobody likes selfish people. You know, I can't stand them, but okay, I'm fine. I'm with you till here. All right, I don't want to be a selfish person. I want to reflect you, but what do you mean lose my life? Why should I lose my life? But here's the interesting part. You know, the word life that he uses in the Greek, it's called psychos, from which comes psychology, you know, the study of who we are. It's a word that it's not referring to our biological life. He's not telling us, go kill yourself. It's referring to our sense of identity, who we are. And in a sense, it's kind of telling us, on what are you building your identity around? And what have you built your identity? Whatever it is you built your identity around, lose it. The top 10 Twitter leaders or the tech entrepreneurs, they define our identity by saying you are okay if you're richer, if you're smarter, if you're more popular. You know. Or as immigrants, you know, the United States is a land of immigrants. We believe our identities, especially if you're coming from an Asian country, is tied to raising great kids who could do what we could not do or fail to do with our lives. Or go to Ivy League colleges, and that's success. Or for some of us, our identity is all about the American dream at any cost. Or if we are younger, you know, our identity is about winning every possible competition out there or being nothing but an A student. You got to keep getting those A's. That's who you are. Or if we are stuck in this workplace, our identity is about, I need to get this one promotion or, you know, just make it to this director or VP, you know. Now, don't get me wrong. There's nothing individually wrong with any of these, okay? I'm not, you know, sounding, I don't want to sound like a, you know, horrible person dumbing us down. There's nothing wrong with all of these. But here's what I want to show you. What's wrong with them? The problem is this. What happens if you don't end up being richer or smarter or popular? What happens if our kids don't turn out to be as great or good as we thought or wanted them to be? Or if they just maybe make it to community college? Or what happens if you lose your visa, or you get laid off, or your job closes down one day? What happens if you're no longer able to win those competitions and not be on top? What happens if you're not able to get those top jobs in those top tech companies? Or what happens if one more time this year also you're overlooked for that promotion? What will happen to you? Think about it. You're going to be so sad, aren't you? Wow, man. I thought this was it. This is why I was investing my whole life in trying to raise these great kids, trying to go after these great things. But if that is how you built your identity around, if you don't get that, you're destroyed. You just feel flattened out. You're like, who am I? You begin to question your sense of self-worth. If I'm not able to get this job in this place, or if I'm not able to make this much money, I'm not valuable. If you buy into that, and if you don't get that, you're just going to be destroyed. You're going to feel so depressed. So what Jesus is trying to tell us, very simple. He offers a more freeing disposition. He gives us a freedom. He says, don't get your identity from those. The world tries to keep telling you, unless you have those, you don't have a real identity. Unless you're constantly pleasing your parents, you're not a good boy or a good girl. Unless you're getting all these things, you're not good. The world keeps trying to tell you, but don't buy into that. I'm telling you, I love you. I'm giving my life for you. And that's not based on anything you've done or you could ever do. It's just as simple as that. You're not going to make yourself more attractive to me by either trying to be a better person or by having all of these things in your life. I just love you. You don't need all these things. If you want to follow me, try not to take your identity from the world's definition of power or beauty or self-expression or position. Find your identity in me. It's very freeing. Then, it doesn't matter what people think about who you are. It doesn't matter if people think you're an attractive person or not. It doesn't matter if you make an A or not. It doesn't matter if our children turn out to be great or not, because guess what? That's not where we draw our identity from. Yeah, we want to try, keep doing this. I'm not saying don't do those things. But when we try to get our identity exclusively in this relationship with Jesus, it is so freeing. You're not pressured by all these other buttons around us, constantly trying to make us conform. It's such a freeing thing. No one says it better than, I have to quote C.S. Lewis, right? I have to quote him. Mere Christianity. C.S. Lewis, let's see if this pops up. Is that thing working? May need a gentle click. C.S. Lewis captures it very beautifully in his book, Mere Christianity. And he says, he kind of paraphrases what Jesus is trying to tell us in this statement. It says, the more we get what we now call ourselves out of the way and let Him take us over, the more truly ourselves we become. Our real selves are all waiting for us in Him. The more I resist Him and try to live on my own, the more I become dominated by my own heredity and upbringing and surrounding and natural desires. Isn't that true? And then he says, it is when I turn to Christ, when I give myself up to His personality, that I finally begin to have a real personality of my own. Nevertheless, you must go to Christ for the sake of a new self. Isn't that so freeing? That you find a new identity in Christ, then all these other things are not bothering you. That's what Jesus is talking about. Do you have that? If we are still caught up in these things that are defining our identities and we are going after them, we're really not following Jesus. We haven't got this. We haven't found this new identity in Jesus. And let's not fool ourselves thinking we're there. And he says, you shouldn't be ashamed of sharing. And you wouldn't be, because now you're not concerned about what people are going to think if you're politically correct or not. You're going to be able to genuinely be there and connect with them. You don't want to go and invite trouble by beating up and holding signs like, all the gay people will die in hell. I mean, that's not what Jesus is talking about, witnessing for himself. If someone is really concerned and comes and talks to you about it, you can freely tell them about the freedom you have in Christ and how this love of Christ is so freeing. And that should captivate them and draw them to Christ, not beating people up and drawing them into his kingdom. That's what Jesus says is such a freeing experience. Deny yourself. Whoever loses his life will find it. But whoever tries to find his life will lose it. You see that? If you're trying to find your identity in these things, you may get that, but you will lose it. But the way to do that, Jesus says, is through him. Not by our efforts, not by our smartness, not by our ability to make people love us more, by performing more, or by doing more, or by winning more, but by surrendering ourselves to Christ. Isn't that so freeing? And Jesus says it doesn't end here. It's not just always, suffering and denying and dying. Because guess what? He says in 9:1, and truly I say to you, there are some standing here who will not taste death until they see the kingdom of God after it has come with power. He's going to come back again. First of all, he didn't just die. He conquered death and he was resurrected. So the thing that you and me fear the most about, which is death, he overcame that. So even that you don't have to be worried about. What can someone do to you at the most? They can kill you. But he says, even that you don't have to worry, because I've conquered death. And I'm going to come again and create this new heaven, new earth in glory. So it's just so freeing, friends. And once again, I have to read Lewis on this as I close. He's so powerful in this quote. Once again from the book on Mere Christianity, he says this: give up yourself and you will find your real self. Lose your life and you will save it. Submit to death, the death of your ambitions and favorite wishes every day, and the death of your whole body in the end. Submit with every fiber of your being and you will find eternal life. Keep back nothing. Nothing that you have not given away will be really yours. Nothing in you that has not died will ever be raised from the dead. Look for yourself. Listen to this carefully, even if you miss the whole thing, please. Look for yourself, and you will find in the long run only hatred, loneliness, despair, rage, ruin, and decay. But look for Christ, and you will find him, and with him, everything else thrown him. Let's pray.